This podcast is presented by Regions Bank. You're chasing your goals, and it's up to you how you want to get there. Let Regions Bank coach you with financial tips that fit your everyday grind. Visit regions.com/next-step to learn more. Regions, member FDIC.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. I'm Ralph Russo, college football writer with the Associated Press. My guest this week is my friend Paul Myerberg, national college football writer from USA Today. There is a lot going on. Willie Taggart is out at Florida State. It seems like a foregone conclusion. Clay Helton will be out at USC soon. Which is the better job, and who might fit those jobs? It's a huge weekend in college football with number 1 LSU and number 2 Alabama playing. We'll preview that one and Penn State, Minnesota, as well as a few other games. The first college football playoff rankings are released this week. Now, we are recording this before they come out. There will be a lot of changes next week after the big games. I think we all kind of know about what we're going to see tonight. What Paul and I will do is give you a few things to look for in the first rankings and why they might be significant. Thanks for listening to the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. You can find us on Westwood One Podcast. You can find us at Apple Podcast. Just about anywhere you get your podcast. Please subscribe, and if so inclined, give us a good review. It helps college football fans find us, and it helps us find more college football fans. And away we go. Joining me on the podcast this week is recurring guest Paul Myerberg from USA Today, and my friend, the great national college football writer. There's a lot going on, and when there's a lot going on that goes in a lot of different directions, Paul is one of my go-tos because Paul can talk about a lot of things. Hi, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
Excellent. So the most important thing that we have to talk about today, and a little reminder, we are recording on Tuesday morning, late morning, early afternoon. So before the playoff rankings come out, though we will talk a little playoff rankings. But mostly it's Election Day, Paul. And I voted because my wife reminded me to vote. It worked out pretty well. I think I was probably moving towards blowing it off, and then I happened to leave at the same time as my wife. That made me feel guilty. I knew there were not going to be any lines, so I went a little out of my way, and I voted. Have you voted yet?
I haven't. It's very easy for me to vote. My voting station is the school around the corner from me. Mm-hmm. So I usually go. There are a couple times people have voted many times no. You can go in the morning and potentially get in a bit of a line. You can go at lunch, get in a line. So like 2:30 is a perfect time to vote. Though, I mean, I'm not sure how many people are going to be voting today, like in the percentage compared to a presidential election. But get out there and vote.
The headliner today was public advocate.
And that's an extremely important. In the city in particular, it's a really important position. It's like a conduit between community services and legislative city council people, whatever. So it's an important job to have. But yeah, it's not like a headliner necessarily.
Right, because public advocate is sort of like a headliner, like Soul Asylum would be a headliner. Not really like better placed as like the fourth band, maybe. Right. Like the really early opener. Do you even know who Soul Asylum is?
Of course I do.
Okay.
But I mean, I'm waiting for you to create the metaphor. You're saying they're not Soul Asylum. Soul Asylum to you would be like, we're voting for president? Or Soul Asylum?
I'm saying that public advocate is Soul Asylum.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
That makes total sense to me.
Yeah. Again, it's not a great headliner, but, you come away enjoying it. Like, you'll feel better for having voted for public advocate, just like you'll feel better for having actually, like, shown up early and seen what Soul Asylum's up to.
Do you ever think that the fact that your music tastes are stuck in 1992, 93 is a problem?
It's not that bad. My daughter keeps me up to date a little bit more. But there's no doubt that my wheelhouse, as most people when it comes to music, is their college years. So like 89 to 92, that's slightly post-college, 93, 94, that will always be the music that is your music, I think, to a certain degree. You may grow, you may regress, but ultimately your favorite music will almost always be your college music, I think, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. So you like Pearl Jam, you like Soul Asylum, you're into the grunge.
Yeah.
Tail end of grunge.
Grunge was definitely a formative moment in my life. I have one more question to ask you about voting before we move on. When you get the voting sticker, the I voted sticker, do you wear it?
No, I don't wear it.
Okay.
I don't wear it. I don't need people to know that I voted. Everyone should assume that the person next to you voted because it's our right as Americans to lend our voice to the electoral process. What I do, actually, I go to the gym in my neighborhood. I go to my same locker stall because I'm a creature of habit, and I slap it on the inside. And my one from 2018 is still on the inside. So I'll just keep it with me and slap it on the inside and add to the collection.
Yeah, I end up, in fact, I'm going to do it right now. I have one on my computer, on my laptop, on the inside of the laptop, not the front-facing part. I have one on my laptop. I'm going to put the new one over that one because the old one is all worn out. So now I'm going to slap that on there. And I have my I voted. Yeah, because I got the sticker, and then I was offered a second one as I was leaving the voting station, to which I said, no thanks. I don't want to hoard them. And then I sort of turned to my wife, and of course my wife put one on because she's kind of a nerd. And I thought, I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know if I want to put this on. I think that I don't want to put this on.
Agreed.
Yeah, I just feel, because like you said, I think it's, you should not be celebrating yourself or others for voting. It's an obligation. We should consider it that. And you know what? Putting a voting sticker on is like flipping the bat after the home run, right?
Yeah, agreed. It's like putting a Alabama sticker on your car. Everybody knows you're an Alabama fan.
Yeah, you don't have to dance in the end zone after a touchdown. Act like you've been there before.
Right, 364 more days, and you can get a new sticker.
Exactly.
So hopefully this one lasts.
All right, so now to football. And we will start with coaching changes. Willie Taggart got fired. If anybody watched the Miami game, it couldn't have been that surprising. The surprise was it sort of came out of nowhere on Sunday with no bubbling or reports or anything like that, no rumors. It just bang happened. So that's always a little startling and surprising. But I don't think that even though they really, really wanted to keep Taggart and not pay out all that money, it was just not looking. There was just no improvement. There was just no discernible improvement over last year. So he is gone. Well, actually, let me ask you, I didn't want to linger too much on him being gone, but let's ask this question, which might be a little controversial question. 2 years in, Willie Taggart is gone. 2 years in, Turner Gill was fired. 2 years in, John Embry was fired from Colorado. They're all African-American coaches. Should I be worried about that?
Yeah, you should. I'm glad you brought it up.
Okay.
I think there's been a undercurrent of race around Willie Taggart for years. At least 3, if not more. And you see it in descriptions of him as brash. If you've ever met Willie Taggart, I will tell you that to me, he's one of the least brash coaches I've ever met. Mm-hmm. It's the description all the time of him being a great recruiter with no mention of him being a great offensive technician, which is what he was before he got to Florida State, as a guy who could build an offense that was physical and dominant. You see it in stories like you saw I believe it was last summer, of the most overrated coaches in college football. Taggart got 30-something% of the vote. And, of course, David Shaw and James Franklin were also in the top 5. And this was an anonymous coaching poll of head coaches in the FBS. Taggart's had to deal with this for a long time. And I'm not comfortable making the connection to say, what happened to Embry and happened to Gill happened to Taggart because they're all African-American coaches. I'm not sure if that's the case. With Taggart in particular, this is something that he had to deal with. And it had to deal with it in a way that, quite honestly, other young white coaches who maybe don't have a sterling record or maybe are just kind of viewed as up-and-comers have never had to deal with. And I think it was unfair to Taggart, and I think it's going to be something that will dog him going forward. I think it's something that has dogged his career, and I think it's incredibly unfortunate because I don't think that I don't think, Ralph, and maybe I'm just making too much of it, if you sub in John Smith for Willie Taggart, not John L. Smith because he was terrible, but generic John Smith, and you say, look at what this guy did. He took over terrible programs at Western Kentucky. By year 3, they were going to a bowl game. Took over a terrible program at South Florida. By year X, they were winning 10 games. Went from Oregon 4-8 to 7-5. Recruited the backbone of a team that is now in the top 10. I don't know if a coach named John Smith would, instead of being praised for, look at this rebuilding job, this magic touch, this Coach Midas, would then be, well, he's only got a record of 2 games under 500. Why would you hire him? I think he was held to an unfair standard. And to me, and I wrote a story about it last year, so I feel like this isn't just me opining. I've talked to other African-American assistant head coaches for this story last year. I think the standard he was held to was incredibly unfair. And he didn't do a great job at Florida State. And I'm not advocating for him to keep his job or to be fired, because I don't care really about Florida State. But I just don't know if the standard he was held to was fair. And I think a lot of the reason that it was unfair is that it had to do with race, to be quite honest.
Okay. I think that's fair on both ends, because I think you could say he was held to an unfair standard, and I felt that too. And also to say that, you know what, he probably, I hate to say deserved to be fired. I don't know, like deserved to be fired is kind of an odd way to describe it. I could say that his firing, I did not feel was necessarily unfair considering the results. How about that?
Yeah, and look,
especially at a place like Florida State, where listen, they're not there for waiting around for long rebuilds and things along those lines. And if you watch the product that was on the field over the last 2 years, it was hard to find real improvement from last year's opening disaster to Virginia Tech to what happened against Miami. It seemed like a very much the same product, maybe with just a slightly different style of offense. So I could understand if you're Florida State, you're saying this isn't getting any better. Here are all the numbers that we have to crunch about boosters and things along those lines. But I would also wonder if, to a certain degree, if he walks into that job with a certain skepticism that is based partially on reasons that are not fair to him, does that speed up this process? Or in other words, already he is working with less patience than maybe somebody else would.
Yeah, I think it's fair to ask that question, certainly at a place like Florida State where boosters are incredibly powerful. It's fair to ask whether he had the support of anybody from the start or from the important people at the start. And look, like you're exactly right, the product wasn't good. And again, neither one of us feel comfortable advocating to fire somebody, let alone advocating for why he shouldn't be fired. It's not really our place. But when you hire Willie Taggart, you look at his track record and you understand that this isn't an immediate boom coach. I mean, we have 3 different tenures to look at here, and I think you look at a guy who needs time to develop. If you felt that the development wasn't going at the speed that you wanted or wasn't heading in the right direction, then absolutely, Florida State, go ahead. It's your money, spend it. But at the same time, I think from the start, there needed to be an understanding that Willie Taggart was going to need time because he needed time everywhere else. And again, it wasn't like he took over Jameis Winston's junior year or sophomore year in 2014 when Florida State was still cruising. It's been all downhill since then. I mean, in a major way. So he didn't take over a powerhouse. So, he could have used more time, and who knows what next year would have brought. Next year could have brought 6-6. So Florida State spent the money, and it's theirs to spend.
The game that we play now, this will be a little less serious than that last topic, is the which job is better. Because at this point, USC is going to open up. I think that there may have been a window for Clay Helton to convince some people if they had finished really strong, gotten to the Pac-12 championship game, played competitively there. And all of a sudden, if you're USC, you're sort of surveying the landscape and you think, you know what, we got a lot going on here. We have a brand new AD. I know the maybe some key boosters aren't going to like this, but maybe there's a path here to not just, a school that's in upheaval to now have to also do a coaching search. I think there was a narrow path to that. That's gone. 55 to whatever it was on, 56-24 or something like that on against Oregon, with a bunch of LA players running around the Coliseum wearing Ducks uniforms. That's not going to work anymore. So we have now passed the Rubicon as far as that's concerned. Across the Rubicon. I don't even know if I used that right. Anyway, so now we'll play this fun game that we do on Twitter all the time, which has no really correct answer. But which job is better, Florida State or USC? And then I'm going to put not just which job is better, but which job is better for James Franklin. So we'll piss off some Penn State people, too, because they'll wonder, why would he leave us? So, but let's just play this game. Which job is better for James Franklin if he would want to leave Penn State?
It's USC, and this is no disrespect to Florida State, but USC is on a different tier to me, and that's not just for James Franklin at this point. Even given USC's what's the polite word, messiness in their athletic department, I still think USC is the better job than Florida State at this juncture. I think Pete Thamel at Yahoo wrote a really strong piece on Sunday night in the wake of Taggart's firing, just outlining how much of a cluster Florida State's athletic department is, and how there's no leadership there, and how they have an AD who came in from within the university, has no connections. And as he mentioned, as we all know, when coaches go through and try to pick jobs, it's not like your NCAA dynasty mode, right? It's not just like, oh, who has the most 5 stars in their backyard? There's so much more that goes into play. It's comfort for your family. It's who you're working with. It's the history of success. It's what's the chain of command? Who am I reporting to? What do my facilities look like? And in almost every way, and USC's got an obvious room to grow in a lot of regard, I still put USC above Florida State in almost every single category. And in terms of style, substance, flash, fitting the personality, close your eyes and picture James Franklin in LA with an ear-to-ear smile, and then picture James Franklin in Tallahassee. No, there's no way on earth, and I put my reputation on it, there's no way on earth James Franklin's going to Florida State. No way in the world. But USC, I could see that, Ralph. I could really see it. And again, not to piss off Penn State people because he's done fantastic there, but I think it will be appealing to him.
Yeah, I think so too. I just think, and this goes with almost any place, I think a lot of coaches will see a certain, like, hey, I've been here a while and I've done a lot of really good things. You can sort of spin that 2 different ways. A, I am settled. I love my AD. I love my president. I've got it working here. I'm just going to sort of sit back into this job and ride it as far as it goes, and maybe even cut out a little early like Bob Stoops did, right? Bob Stoops found the perfect job with a great situation, great alignment there, and he rode that sucker out and then cut out early. Honestly, I can't think of a better college football coach career in some ways than Bob Stoops. I think he is the blueprint model for modern coaches who make a lot of money, man. Kill it for 15 years at a great place and then get the hell out early and go enjoy your money. And, of course, there's already rumors that he might come back in. That said, I see the benefit of, boy, I've been at Penn State for a while. I've done great things here. I got this damn ceiling of Ohio State I'm hitting my head on. Now, they might beat Ohio State in a couple of weeks. And there's no reason if you're Penn State and you're James Franklin, you shouldn't think, yeah, I can beat Ohio State. I can beat Ohio State. But you're never going to be better situated than Ohio State. Ohio State will always be the program that has a little more than you. It will always be slightly more advantage, so you will always be punching up to hit Ohio State. And you may get them, but it's going to be a little hard. Whereas at USC, you are at the top of the food chain. There is nobody in the Pac-12. They can compete against you. They can hit you. They can take you down. Obviously, if it's not run competently, we're seeing that a whole bunch of Pac-12 teams can go past USC. But if USC is run competently, there is nobody in the Pac-12 that should be able to consistently beat USC.
Yeah, USC is a great white shark, for sure. They're top of the food chain in this little body of water in the FBS. There's no doubt. What I think is impressive about what Franklin's done at Penn State is, so Ohio State has ruled the Big Ten for this millennium, right? So it's been 20 seasons where they've been the dominant team of the conference. Throughout this time, right, there's been individual teams that have popped up to play the foil. A Michigan State, a Wisconsin, I guess, and Iowa every 6 years, very rarely Michigan. I think Penn State, and maybe I'm wrong, but at least in the last 10 or 12 years off the top of my head, they seem the closest to Ohio State, or at least the best situated to be the team that can every single year be the 1A to Ohio State's 1, and just take that spot. I think that's a really amazing achievement if you think about it for 3 reasons. One being, sanctions. 2 being the fact that Franklin was not beloved at the beginning of Penn State. I don't think he had total buy-in from everyone in that community. And, I think his first 2 years were a slog for him. I think they were difficult for him and his staff. He had to make tough choices on his staff with firing guys like Donovan and changing the offense. So I think it's an incredible achievement for Franklin to get Penn State to this point. And knowing his personality, I don't think he's ever going to buy into the idea like how we see it, which is you're kind of tilting at a windmill at Ohio State, and every once in a while you could beat them and get to a Rose Bowl or maybe make the playoff, but you're always kind of running uphill. I don't think he sees that, but anyone would notice that USC has the ability, if run in the same way that he's run Penn State, to put their foot on the Pac-12, at least on the Pac-12 South, and every single year go into December playing for a New Year's Six Bowl. I mean, USC, at the very least, if it's run well, has that potential.
You mentioned Pete Thamel. One of the things he also, I heard his podcast with Wetzel and 40, and he made a good point about Franklin. He's been a big star in State College, which is a place where you are always the football coach of Penn State all the time. In other words, you are the most recognizable person in town. You are a superstar all the time. It's a small town. You're not going to get a ton of sort of me time. In L.A., that's not really the case, right? I mean, you're a star. If Pete Carroll was a star, you are a star if you are the coach of USC, but it's a town full of stars. And I could see how him or any other coach might decide, you know what, this is a little different, right? It's going to be a little harder to live, so to speak, because it's a lot more expensive and the taxes are higher, and I might have but you know what, when you're making $7 million a year, you can make that work out. So I could also see Franklin being, in some ways, looking at the idea of like, you know what, I'm going to go to a big city and blend in a little bit, as opposed to being the number one game in town at a smaller town. And I tend to agree with you also as far as the USC or Florida State. I also wonder if, at Penn State, he was able to recruit in a certain way because of academic standards and what they were looking for culturally that might be a better fit for moving to California than it would be for moving into Florida, where I think he would kill it and do great. But I just wonder if what he's used to from Penn State is a little more similar to a private school like USC.
No, I agree. I think it's a good comparison. And look, we spoke about race before. James Franklin's an Afro-American head coach, one of the very few in college football. And I think that ability to go into LA and speak to a African-American student athlete, recruit and prospect, is something that he'll be able to hit the ground running there. And I'm just speaking about recruiting. I think that's going to be a powerful draw because SC is its own draw, but you also bring in a guy who represents, like I said, a very, very, very small group of black head coaches in college football. And James Franklin is, along with David Shaw, the preeminent one. So I think USC could do a hell of a lot worse. Just put it that way. If they hire James Franklin, I'd consider that an A-plus home run.
Okay, so before we pivot here, who should Florida State hire? Who is a possibility? Because, the names that are sort of the hot names, like Matt Rule, I think his next step is next step is the NFL.
Oh yeah, his next step is the NFL or Notre Dame. I mean, he's not going to Florida State. That's just stupid.
Or Penn State if James would leave, right? Maybe.
I don't think so.
Why do we think so? You mentioned Notre Dame there. You're not of the opinion that you think Notre Dame is going to open, do you? Because that seems to be people talking about in that way. Like Brian, I mean, I guess conceivably Kelly could bounce to the NFL. He has had interest from there before, but I can't see Brian Kelly going anywhere else. And I certainly don't think there's any reason Notre Dame wouldn't want Brian. I mean, there's a whole bunch of Notre Dame fans that are delusional and don't want Kelly, but Brian Kelly has got Notre Dame rocking pretty good, I think.
Yeah, I don't see Kelly leaving after this season unless it's of his own volition. I don't see Kelly leaving, period, because I can't foresee 4-8, 4-8, 5-7 coming up. I don't see him leaving, period, unless it's of his own volition at this point. I just think Rule is. He obviously signed a contract at Baylor. We don't know the parameters of it because it's private. We don't know the buyout or anything like that. But it seems to me that if I was going to imagine his next 3 or 4 years, it's continuing to build Baylor. Maybe the Giants opens up. Maybe something like that he can't say no to. But if I was going to guess his next college stop is Notre Dame. And I'm not going to guess the timeline of it because, like I said, Kelly's going to pick his own timeline. But he checks every single box. And the reason I brought up Rule is, like, if I'm a USC or a Florida State and it's maybe more relative to Florida State than USC, because I think USC's list of contenders is obviously far stronger at this point. I just think that if I had an opening and my thought process was, who's the guy I can bring in who will build a culture that I can identify with, who will have us winning fairly quickly, because that's been Rhule's MO. I mean, he's went 1-11, 2-10 those first 2 years at Temple and Baylor, and then it was off. Matt Rhule's one of the first guys I call. I think if you're one of those schools, you want to aim high, Matt Rhule is easily on my speed dial for any opening in college football at a major place.
It is pretty remarkable what he did at Baylor, because that was an absolute mess when he walked in there, as far as what had happened with Briles and the level of accountability for the players that he had got left behind, and for him to be able to flip that thing to the extent that he has this year is remarkable, absolutely remarkable. I like Matt Campbell. I've always thought he has a chance to be a terrific coach. $6 million buyout to get him. Florida State's already hemorrhaging money.
I don't see it. I don't see Matt Campbell going to Florida State.
Yeah, he's a particular guy, and I do think that I understand. Like, Iowa State's a really tough place to win. Like, he's got a good team this year that's already lost 3 games.
But he's lost 2 of them by 3 points.
No, exactly. A total of 10 points between the 3 games. Right. But I'm saying that speaks to what Iowa State is. Like, you're always going to be in that margin of error at Iowa State, where like you get a couple of breaks and you might knock out a 10-win season, but if you don't, you probably will be around that 6 to 8 wins.
Right. Which, if you know Iowa State's history, if that's your baseline every year, then you're a hell of a football coach. To reiterate the idea that it's not as easy to just throw a coach onto it is easy to throw a coach onto a here are 10 names list, and not so easy to actually connect the coach there. There are guys who want ownership of places. It's why the Dabo to Alabama thing is kind of childish, because he's very proud and has ownership of this baby that he's created that has turned into a hulking male that dominates college football. Campbell and those guys, there's this sense of pride and ownership in what he's built in Ames. So I just don't think it's that easy to say, okay, well, if he pays $6 million, of course he'll come to Florida State. I mean, that's message board thought right there. Mm-hmm. I just don't think that's realistic. I think what's realistic is Mark Stoops.
Yeah, me too.
That's realistic, and that's not this bad hire either.
No, it certainly wouldn't be. I mean, considering what he built at Kentucky, a place that was, again, in disarray when he got there, and that needs a lot of work to get good. You have to do a lot of work to make Kentucky good at football.
Yeah, and he won 10 games there. And even this year, he's like starting a Wildcat at quarterback, and they may make a bowl game. It's pretty impressive. I think he's a good football coach, and I think he's got fingerprints on some really good Florida State teams under Jimbo. So I think there are a lot of people saying it's going to be his brother. I think Mark Stoops is a safe hire.
We need to talk about that for a second, because as we're recording this, like, I know Twitter is already breaking down. I had checked on, because you have to, right? I had checked on some of this. I woke up to Stoops rumors, went to bed to them. I checked on a couple of them, and I had a couple of people, not necessarily super close to Bob, but people who would kind of give me like at least a fair idea, say skeptical, highly unlikely. So I'm not worried about it. I'm not really worried about that. But no, I mean, if
I will say, Ralph, I spoke to a former player of his very recently, and what he told me about Stoops, because it came up, was he misses the action, right? And it's funny because I think the Dispatch wrote, like, the first Urban Meyer Speaks story of the season was, I think, from the Dispatch, and maybe I'm wrong. It was, Meyer said something along the lines of, I miss being in it. And I think that's a really identifiable emotion for anybody. Like, you miss hanging out with your friends. You miss when you played college baseball. Like, you miss that camaraderie, right? And I think these guys miss that. But what this player told me was he thinks Stoops is going to get that in the XFL, because it's like that rush and that juice without the pressure and with a nice paycheck and without worrying about, like, oh, man, I got to get ready for Texas next week. It's a more relaxed but still equivalent
to hanging with the guys, right?
Yeah, to getting there. So, yeah, I agree with you. Nothing that I've heard or anyone that I've spoken to, including this person who knows Stoops well, makes me think that this is realistic.
Here's the interesting thing also about Stoops is, if you remember, toward the end of his tenure, there was a lull, and the complaint from a lot of Oklahoma fans is, man, he's just not working hard enough. And there is I don't want to make Bob Stoops sound lazy, because he's one of the great coaches of our era. and maybe one of the great coaches ever. But there is an element of truth in the fact that Bob Stoops was not the type of grinder that Saban or maybe Meyer is like the ultimate grinder when it comes to recruiting and things along those lines. Like, he's just never off, right? Stoops, and one of the reasons why, again, it worked so well at Oklahoma with Stoops is that he was able to create a little bit of a life for himself. He was able to have a beer with his guys every once in a while. Like, there was a level of pressure, the level of pressure that you see around the Alabama programs or where Urban Meyer is, that wasn't the working conditions that Bob Stoops necessarily created. I say that to set up, like, so you're going to tell me now that guy is going to step into a place like a Florida State or a USC, which needs a lot of work. I mean, those are great programs. Listen, I mean, there's the potential for both of those places is to win national championships, but like, he's going to have to grind a little, especially at a place like Florida State, as far behind that is. So that's one of the reasons why, like, the Stoops thing, I'm not saying he won't come back, but I'm also saying, like, there's a disconnect there between the guy who was criticized for not being enough of a grinder to stepping into a new situation where he's really going to have to grind.
And he doesn't need to, like, his reputation is sterling, like you said. I mean, when you make a list of the best coaches of his generation, he's on it. Like, he doesn't need Florida State at all, and for a guy, like you said, what he was able to do at Oklahoma is create an atmosphere where he could build a house so big you could see it from the highway, but still, like, live in this bubble. And I don't mean to say that Norman's a bubble, because George Schroeder will get mad, but I mean, like, he was able to create this environment for himself where he could do this job and do it at a wildly high level without being under the strain and under the spotlight and under the pressure that you would get at Florida State.
Right. Without killing himself to a certain degree, without getting what Meyer has, right, where, like, the pressure is literally making your brain break.
And look, credit Bob Stoops for being able to do that, because I can't think of a lot of other guys who have and won at a super high level. I just don't know why Florida State. Like, why would that connection exist for anybody? Because he's available or because he's not working? Because otherwise there's no connection there. Yeah. Because he was Spurrier's coordinator in Gainesville in 1996? I mean, what's the connection?
We are less than 48 hours as of this taping into the Florida State coaching search, and it is already quite a thing. That
Do you know what might have happened, Ralph?
Buckle
honestly?
Up, folks.
So this is ABC 27 in North Florida, South Georgia, right? This person, I don't know who they are. You have to reach a certain point to be at ABC 27, so I give them just respect off the bat. They could have gotten a text like, Stoops is going to take the job, and he assumed Bob. There are multiple Stoops out there.
There are many Stoopses.
There are three of them that it could have been. So maybe he just thought Bob, he or she. I don't know.
It'd be pretty cool if it ends up being Mike, though. Wouldn't it be wild if it ends up being Mike?
Can you imagine Mike Stoops? Yeah, that'd be great. They'd be like, oh, my God. Oh, someone traded for Manning. You're like, oh, really? Oh, Cooper?
I'm trying to remember.
We traded for Cooper Manning.
I'm trying to remember, like, the other. I have his number. The other Stoops brother who was at Youngstown. I can't remember his name, and I don't want to, like, tap away. Who's very, like, who doesn't look like the other two. That's the interesting thing. Huh. Like, because all the Stoops brothers kind of look the same. He doesn't look as much like the other Stoops brothers, especially compared to, like, Mike with that intensity. He's definitely a lot more mellow. And I met him. Gosh, I gotta Google it now, because I met him when he was working for Bo, when I went to do my story on Bo Pelini at Youngstown, sure. And he's been at Youngstown for a really long time. I think he's still there, but I almost feel like he's sort of like the older, cool, sort of like most laid back kind of Stoops, like.
Yeah, he's the Cale Gundy. Or is Mike the cool Gundy? I don't know, actually.
Well, it's a different kind of cool, though, right? Is it like, I mean, like, there's like the cool, I ride a motorcycle cool, and then there's like the cool, like, here's the guy with the interesting book collection, right?
Okay, so that's me. Cool. That's cool. I really want to ride a motorcycle, by the way. I want to get one. And not one of those, like, you see those people in our neighborhood riding little scooters around, black
those
scooters.
Those are not.
Those aren't motorcycles. I did see someone crash, come off the curb with his girlfriend on the back, which is great. I want to ride a motorcycle. I want to get, like, not a Harley, but obviously a step up from a Vespa. I want to ride a motorcycle. I want to ride across the country when I get fired and live my life that way.
I did want that at one point in my life. I believe it's Jim Stoops. Yes, I think it's Jim Stoops. I did want that at one point in my life, and then I don't know. You get a kid, and the wife is like, "No, you're not doing that," and so that dream goes away. So we're already way into this, and we haven't even talked about this weekend. I'm going to take a quick break, and when we will preview number 1 versus number 2 and the battle of undefeateds in Minneapolis. What? Right after this on the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast.
This podcast is presented by Regions Bank. You're chasing your goals, and it's up to you how you want to get there. Let Regions Bank coach you with financial tips that fit your everyday grind. Visit regions.com/next-step to learn more. Regions, member FDIC.
And we're back on the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. Ralph Russo, joined by Paul Myerberg from USA Today. So there's a lot of big games going on this weekend. Actually, well, you know what? Before we even talk about the very big games, we are doing this several hours before the first college football playoff rankings come out. I didn't feel like it was necessary to wait for the college football rankings because they are going to be scrambled by this weekend's games to a certain degree. Like, we'll have a much better picture of what the committee wants and where this race is going after this weekend when LSU and Alabama are done playing each other. But let me ask you maybe like the one thing that you're sort of interested to see when the rankings do come out tonight. Again, we're taping it before they come out.
Yeah, 2 things. And I think like a lot of people, I'm interested where they have Clemson. I think they'll be in the top 4. They might be 4th. I don't think anyone would be surprised if they are 4th. Would you?
No, I think that's where I have them penciled in.
Yeah, so I think that's one thing. And the other thing, I want to see where they have those 2 one-loss Pac-12 teams. I want to see where they have Oregon, where they have Utah. I think both have a case for the top 10. I think you'll see both in the top 10, probably obviously the back end of it. But Oregon in particular, based on the way they've played, the way they've looked, and the fact they have a quality loss, that comparison with Georgia, I think Georgia will be ahead of them. But it'll be interesting to see if those teams are 6-7 or if Oklahoma shoves in ahead of Oregon and Oregon's 8.
Yeah, I'm interested to see where Oklahoma is and how high up Baylor is as well, because I suspect there could be some weirdness going on in the Big 12 at the end, toward the end of the year here. And I'm wondering, like, how close Baylor needs to be to beat Oklahoma and then assume Oklahoma's status. You know what I'm saying? Because it's one thing to beat Oklahoma, but will you beat Oklahoma after you beat them? Could you be the team that will get the same respect as Oklahoma? Now, Baylor, of course, does its Baylor thing and had a ridiculously terrible non-conference schedule, which is sort of a philosophy it's used for a long time, but it was also a philosophy built that worked for them this season because they weren't thinking playoff. They were thinking get into a bowl game this season. So sometimes that just all of a sudden you find yourself in a playoff race. So I'm kind of interested to see what that ends up being all about, as well as sort of the group of 5 thing. I am interested to see, like, right now in the AP poll, Cincinnati is the highest ranked group of 5 team and a team out of the American. I don't think they're even the 3rd or 4th. I think they're not even maybe the 3rd best team in that conference. I actually think that Memphis and SMU are both better than Cincinnati. And I know Cincinnati beat UCF, but I would also say that if those 2 teams played 10 times, 5 on each field, UCF would win most of them.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. The American's really good.
It's very good and super entertaining.
You've got 6 teams that I have my top 25 because all those teams that you mentioned along with UCF, that would be 5. UCF, Navy, SMU, Memphis, so 5. I got 5 in my own top 25 because I think the league is that good. The American's going to be interesting. I would have Memphis ahead of Cincinnati in the playoff, in the rankings, because they have a solid SEC win, and then they beat an unbeaten SMU. Mm-hmm. So I think Memphis will be ahead of Cincinnati, but look, they're going to be boom, 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 boom in that top 25. And also you might have 2 Mountain West teams. I don't know if San Diego State gets in, but certainly Boise's going to be in the top 25.
Yeah, Boise I think should be. San Diego State is Listen, God bless Rocky Long. They have been so really, really successful. They're not the most impressive-looking team when you watch them this year. You know, they sort of slog along, and they've won a lot of close games against some kind of mediocre competition. But, man, that guy has done such a great job at that school. It's pretty impressive. So that's the playoff rankings. We have the big game this weekend. And, of course, the big storyline has been with 1 and 2 is – it's easy to, I wrote a story that should be hitting the wire today. Oh, my God, the last time we saw this game, this 1-2 matchup with these teams, it was 9-6. Now, look at what football has become. Like I think I wrote in my story today, the offensive revolution has reached its final frontier. Like this was the last place, was the LSU-Alabama rivalry it had not reached, and now we are there. Do you think we will get the fireworks that we are expecting this weekend?
Hey, that's great. And you're totally right. It's certainly not going to be 9-6. I think we'll get it, you know, and I think obviously a lot depends on Tua, how healthy he's going to be. Obviously, the assumption is he's going to play. A lot hinges on that, you know, because what we know from Tua is when he loses his mobility, as he did at times late last season, his effectiveness goes down. You know, when he can't move in the pocket, and I'm not saying he's, you know, Lamar Jackson, but when he can't move in the pocket and roll and make throws on the run, his production goes down, and Alabama's offensive production goes down. So I think that's a big deal. All things being equal, you have to say LSU's looked better than Alabama all season, and I don't think that's criminal, and I don't think it's you know, a slag against Alabama at all. LSU's looked the part of the number one team in the country. To me, a healthy Tua and a home field makes me want to pick Alabama. But you're right. I expect this game to be in the 30s for both teams. And I expect when it's done that Gary Danielson will say that they should meet again.
You know what? I was going to ask you something else, but let's move right into that. I won't do the rant again, but if you want to hear the rant on this last podcast with Brett McMurphy, I did a big rant about how ridiculous I think it is to try to wedge two teams from the same conference into the playoff. I just think it's a terrible idea. But do you suspect that the loser of this game, or what's the scenarios? Alabama loses, it gets in. LSU loses, it gets in.
Well, I think the similarities, I mean, the scenarios are similar, and I think they're identical. In fact, it's the other win out and obviously win the SEC and prevent Georgia from doing so. It's the loser win out, and for Alabama, that means looking impressive against Auburn at the end of the year and being 11-1 with a bullet. And then it's having, you assume Clemson, and you assume the Big Ten champion will have one loss at most. So you're putting those two teams in. So basically you just need help from one of Big 12, Pac-12. You know?
How much help, though? Do you need those?
Significant.
Do you need those schools to get, like, second losses? Or,
absolutely.
Okay, so you're in the same boat as me. Like,
absolutely.
I don't want to see Alabama. And by the way, I would also say I don't want to see a second Big Ten team in there if there's a good option in another conference.
Yeah, that is not how this works. And I know that people get hung up on this best four teams thing, but that's not how it's going to work. It's only worked like that in the past when you've had two lost conference champion from a Power 5. That's the only scenario where it's worked. It won't be like that if you have an Oregon at 12-1, a Clemson at 13-0, an Ohio State / Penn State at 13-0, 12-1, and then you have Oklahoma 12-1 or Baylor 13-0. It's not going to happen. They're not going to put two SEC teams into the field. Now, as we've seen, if Alabama wins 29-28, wouldn't surprise me at all if LSU's 3 or 4 for the next 3 or 4 weeks until the final one. Because the final one is where we've seen enormous changes in the past. That final ranking after you have conference champions is when you see movement, is when you see these guys in that room making the final decision based on the entire complete picture. And for an Oregon or an Ohio State or a Penn State or an Oklahoma, that means one additional win against a Power 5 team and a really good Power 5 team at that point. So I don't foresee that happening, barring, two lost champions. And I think that, and look, Gary Danielson gets paid a lot of money to toe the company line and support the SEC. But people who do that and basically work for conferences or work for the SEC and plug this notion and support this notion are being disingenuous. And they're just basically you're being a Fox News, primetime host or an MSNBC primetime host. You're catering to your audience.
Thank you for
not speaking the truth.
Thank you for hitting both sides there. This is stick to sports.
Well, look, both sides are just as bad. Let's just be honest. Okay. But it's disingenuous to say that there's a chance without also having the caveat and the asterisk of if there are 2 loss champions, because there's not a chance without a 2 loss champion.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that's good. Listen, I've heard the argument for beyond that if Oklahoma's sitting there 12-1, nope, we're going to go with the team that didn't make its conference championship game, or we're going to go if Oregon or Utah is sitting there at 12-1, nope, we're going to go with the team. And I don't want to see that, because I think you're literally rewarding a team for not reaching its conference championship game to a certain degree, right? They didn't have that last tough challenge, and now you're helping them. See, I would also split some hairs here too, though. LSU's, because of just the luck of the draw of the SEC schedule machine, has been allowed to play a couple of tougher SEC East, the SEC East teams. They got Florida on their schedule. Mm-hmm. And they also had a really good non-conference game in Texas, which may be not a great non-conference game by the time the season looks out, but you know what? It's probably better than playing Duke in Atlanta. So the case has been made that, well, if Alabama loses at home, now of course you bring the Tua element into that, but if Alabama loses at home with a healthy enough to play Tua, they don't have much of anything going on as far as resume stuff. And I don't get too hung up on resume. I know Alabama is really damn good. Like, I can see with my eyes that Alabama is awesome again. But the resume becomes a little flimsy if all you've beaten is Auburn. Whereas if LSU loses on the road in a close game with Florida victory, with, the other wins that they'll accumulate in the with Auburn already on the list, and having gone to Texas, that the LSU resume is better. So LSU is in a better position to be that team that loses and gets in, whereas with Alabama, if you start playing the resume game, it gets a little tougher to make the case for the Tide if you're just playing the raw resume game.
Yeah, that's tough, right? Because, like you said, everyone would look at Alabama and say this is a really good football team. And a team that could beat anybody on any given day in the country. I mean, it's obvious.
That's how they got in the year they didn't win the SEC West and got in. Now, of course, again, they were being compared to a 2-loss Ohio State team that won its conference but lost to Oklahoma and lost badly to Iowa. So there was, I think Alabama was the best of 2 not so great choices there. But I'm talking about a situation where there are other pretty good choices. And basically in that situation, Alabama got they're Alabama.
Right, but this year, look, as good as they are, obviously, and as good as the program is because they're historic, you're right. I mean, if it came down to it, they're 11-1. The eyeball test is great, but the resume wouldn't even be as good as Oklahoma's, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and that would be it would be weird. It would be super strange. Yeah. To have an Alabama team that is 11-1 and looks the part on TV, finish 5th or 6th, but the resume wouldn't be there. It just wouldn't, So you're right. I mean, I think the only road to getting 2 SEC teams in, if we're talking about just straightforward comparison of like-minded record-wise teams, is to have Alabama beat LSU and then LSU be 11-1.
I'll make you make a pick. Give me a pick. Who do you think is going to win this weekend?
I'm going to stick with Alabama. And obviously that might change as we learn more about Tua, if we learn anything. But I'm going to stick with Alabama because Alabama beats LSU.
Yeah, I mean,
it's kind of what they do.
We haven't seen it otherwise in a while. So
it's been quite some time since LSU beat Alabama, right?
Yeah.
When was the last time?
I'm in that boat too. I'm very much in the I will. The last time was 9-6.
9-6, right? I mean,
yeah, I'm in the boat of at this point. I will pick it. I will believe it when I see it.
And the 9-6 game was a Sandusky day, right?
It was. You know what? Let's hit on that for just a moment, just a second here. Because I got into a text conversation with Stuart Mandel about this. Because I was not at the 9-6 game. Now, it wasn't because of the Sandusky thing, but because I wasn't at the 9-6 game, I ended up doing a lot more work that day on Sandusky and where that was going. Yeah, it is pretty wild to think back that that also happened on that day. My one question for you, and I really don't want to go deep down this rabbit hole because God knows you can just get caught in it forever. When that happened on that day, when that news broke on that day, you, Paul Myerberg, on your own, sitting at your desk or in your living room without talking it through with other news people, did you get a sense of where that was heading? Did you have a feeling that, oh my gosh, this is going to be the biggest news story in the country for about a month?
I was working at the New York Times at the time, and I was sitting, I can say this now because he's left the place and he used to get mad when people moved his stuff. I was sitting at Richard Sandemir's desk watching football, the pregame stuff, and that news broke. And I think I realized at least that it was important. And I get up and I walk through the newsroom to go see Connor Ennis, who used to work at the AP and was the college sports editor at the time.
Good guy,
and
good friend.
And I say, hey, Connor, and he looks up at me, and he is like whiter than white. All the blood has escaped from his body and left the building. Completely ashen, ghost face, and I realized, okay, so this is going to be a news story today. I think the New York Times is going to be busy this afternoon. I think I realized somewhat quickly, based on the reaction of people in the newsroom, that it was a big deal.
Okay, I think that knew it was a big deal, and immediately, this is my one anecdote from it, the next day wrote, this could be the end for Joe Paterno. The next day I wrote, but I will not give myself that much credit. I still didn't get it. I still didn't really get it. Because the tone of that column was not, this will be the end because what did Joe know and when did Joe know it? Like, it did not get into that area. And again, I do not want to start relitigating that. We will not have that conversation here for anybody who thinks we are going to just stop now. That was not the tone of that column. The tone of that column was, here is this, I believe he was 80 at that point, right? Or 79 or, something in that area. Here is this coach at a point in his career. If this scandal sweeps through this athletic program and school, it will taint everybody. But again, not to the extent that what ended up happening. It will just taint everything. You will have new leadership at the very top. It is a perfect time for Joe to sort of step aside and just say, that's it, I'm done.
Yeah,
right?
And I remember a couple of days later, and I think AP is the king of obits, so you probably know this, but like at the Times, the crucial thing for an obituary was, what will you say in the first paragraph? Joe Paterno, comma, the multiple-time championship-winning coach at Penn State, will it then be, comma, died at blank blank, or will it be who also under his watch? And the question I had for people there was, will Paterno, will this be in the lead? And I think within a couple of days, people are like, this is in the lead.
No doubt
this is a story.
No doubt within a couple of days, I think we in fact, by Monday, when they didn't have the press conference and all of a sudden, it went from, for me, like DEFCON 5 to DEFCON 1 from Sunday to Monday. So my column was not written under DEFCON 1, and it definitely missed a lot of the point of where this thing was headed. But at least by Sunday, I sort of was like, I think this is just going to end up this is just going to blow out the whole thing. But even then, I didn't totally grasp what was going on at Penn State. We're going to stop with that right there because, again, that's a big rabbit hole. There are a couple of other interesting games going on this weekend, one involving Penn State. We'll go back to Penn State. We've talked to James Franklin. What a great job he did sort of lifting Penn State out of the ashes of that scandal after Bill O'Brien at least sort of stabilized things. Penn State plays Minnesota. Minnesota is maybe the most surprising team other than Baylor. They have not played anybody, but what has happened at Minnesota is they won a bunch of games close early in the season, and I think this happens in college football. They don't really know that they're not that good, and then they get a bunch of confidence, and then they play some bad teams and blow them out, and now they're dangerous.
Yeah, it's funny. I wrote the same thing, I think, last Thursday because I want to do the games in November that will matter. And I wrote that, and someone from Minnesota reached out to me and said, hey, South Dakota State is going to maybe win the national championship in the FCS, and Georgia Southern just beat App State, get your head right. These are pretty good wins. The truth is that Minnesota is like a bouncing ball away from being 6-2, which still would be pretty good. Still good job by PJ Fleck. They're rolling right now. They're running the ball on everybody. I mean, they're just destroying people. Let's mention quickly, though, that it is Illinois, Nebraska, Rutgers, and Maryland that they're killing on the ground. Right. I think Penn State's a little bit of a different animal. Certainly their run defense has been pretty outstanding for most of the last 6 games. I think Penn State wins. Penn State's a better team. They're a more cohesive team, a stronger team overall, better depth,
more
better
explosive talent. Team, too. They have more game-breaking players, though. Those 2 receivers on Minnesota are pretty damn good. Oh, yeah,
they've got NFL talent on that team, certainly at wide receiver. The quarterbacks played great. The explosiveness for Penn State, I'm glad you mentioned it. In the past, even with McSorley, the explosiveness for Penn State was on the ground. And it wasn't like you had guys that – I remember watching them play Ohio State twice in state college and thinking, oh, man, if Penn State had a guy who could just stretch the field, who could burn people deep, who could take a 10-yard out and go 70, that's what's separating this team. And I think they found it. So Penn State's dangerous. I think it's still a great moment for Minnesota to have this type of game at home, 2 top 15 unbeaten teams in the Big Ten. It's a great moment for them. But, yeah, I think Penn State wins and gets ready for Ohio State.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about programs like Minnesota, and I think Wake is sort of in that spot, and I think Baylor, even if it doesn't turn out to be the ultimate dream season and you win the division and you pull off the huge upset, just win the games that position yourself to have those opportunities, right? If you're Baylor, take care of TCU this weekend, and all of a sudden you have a home game when you're undefeated against Oklahoma. And hot damn, you may have game day. If you can just do the things that you need to do to position yourself to have these moments, it is a great season. And again, this is a larger discussion about college football. That's sort of what makes college football, right? No matter what, if Baylor has a home game undefeated against Oklahoma, this will be a special season for Baylor. Even if they lost the damn game, it would be a special season for Baylor. And that's what Minnesota has now. Minnesota took care of its business, and this will always be, hey, man, you remember that season we started 8-0, and we had Penn State, and boy, we had them for a quarter or two. So whether they win or lose, this is a special season for Minnesota. And I think for most of college football, that's what you're looking for when you're those programs, is the ability to sort of capture that special season. Anything else interesting for you this weekend? As far as I guess Iowa-Wisconsin's a pretty important game, especially considering if Minnesota does lose, that throws the entire West completely wide open.
Yeah, I mean, the West is so undecided right now with 3 pretty good teams. We're going to know in the next 4 weeks. Wisconsin's hard to peg, right? Because for 4 games or 5 games, it looked like they could beat anybody, and since then they've looked like, fairly pedestrian. I like Iowa in the game because, unlike Wisconsin, Iowa's fairly consistent. I think Iowa is. It's
an interesting kind of consistent, though.
I know, but it is. They're fairly consistent, And
they have not scored more than, I believe it's 24 points in a game against a Power 5 team that's not Rutgers, and even against Rutgers, I think they only scored 30.
Yeah, but then again, they've lost 2 games, and they should have probably won both. I mean, you can make the case at least that they should have beat Michigan because they scored only a field goal. Mm-hmm. And Penn State, they played extremely well, better than anyone else has. So I think this is a good football team. And, yeah, is it ugly? Iowa football's ugly.
It's going to be a lot of punts.
There's going to be a lot of punts. There's going to be a lot of punts on 4th and 2 from the 41, the opponent's 41.
Both teams.
There's going to be this kind of stuff.
Yes, both teams this weekend.
And that's great. I love that. There's something, by the way, when I think about why I love college football and why I loved it in the first place, it's sitting cross-legged, maybe 2.5 feet away from the TV, with snow outside, watching Kijana Carter go for 216 in the snow against Purdue. That's college football to me. That's always been college football to me. That's it's like a warm blanket. This game kind of feels that way. I hope the weather sucks. It's not quite late enough to be truly crappy, but I hope the weather's terrible. I hope it's 17-14, 17-16. I want this game to be everything that it has been in the past. But I like Iowa to win.
I think you're overshooting 17-16. By the way, I think the win. I think the first of 14 wins this game.
Love it. I think it's great.
We're gonna end where we started, only because we brought up PJ Fleck. So let's go back to Florida State, because I had an interesting conversation with another guy a college football writer. We started texting back and forth with each other on the idea of PJ Fleck at Florida State. Your thoughts?
Okay, so the respect level for PJ Fleck and the street cred is growing, obviously. And I think it's probably time for people who hold he's quirky and it's row the boat and it's 18-letter acronyms and holding that against him, that kind of stuff's probably got to die because he's obviously a good football coach. The thing about PJ Fleck is if you're Florida State and you hire PJ Fleck, what you do is it's like you're at a poker table. You put all of your goods in the middle of the table and you just shove them to PJ Fleck. The football program becomes PJ Fleck's football program. He is the face of the program. He is the voice of the program. He determines everything from the colors of the walls to the music they play during practice, to how you stretch, to how you recruit, to how you talk to the media, to everything. The picture that you put on your program, PJ's got to approve that because it's PJ Fleck's program. And it works. It worked at Western Michigan. It's working at Minnesota. I don't know if Florida State's the kind of place where they say, hey, it's all yours. You know, there are a lot of cooks in Tallahassee. So I don't know if PJ Fleck is going to get, the boosters' approval because boosters want to, be in the mix. And I don't know if they can do that if PJ Fleck is there.
Paul Myerberg from USA Today. It was a long conversation. We covered a lot of ground. Go vote. I know you're going to run out and do that right now. Appreciate your time, and hopefully we will run into each other at a press box real soon. For
sure. Can I close with saying what Bob Stoops was doing last night when people were saying that he was the head coach of Florida State? This is according to Kerry Murdoch.
Please do.
Spoke with Bob Stoops this morning, Kerry tweets. He tells me the rumors, reports of him being a candidate for the Florida State job opening are not accurate. Says he was at the new Hard Rock Casino all day yesterday and at a Dan Marino Foundation party last night. So he's living his life. He doesn't want to go to Tallahassee. Why would you? He got to gamble all day and then hang with Marino at night. You're not going to Tallahassee.
That definitely sounds like a guy who's looking to go to the swamps of Florida to recruit kids. Yeah, that's definitely the life pivot that Bob Stoops wants to make right now.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, thanks, Rob.
And now 3 and out. First down. I'll give my picks for this weekend's games. I stopped picking against Alabama a few years ago, and generally that has worked out okay. I'll take the Tide. I also think we might not get quite as many points as some of the experts are anticipating here. The Vegas over-under is 65, and I think I'd take the under there. As good as these offenses are, I could see both coaches taking a few less chances in this game, maybe trying to slow things down a little bit, especially if Alabama were to get up a couple of scores in the second half. I could certainly see Nick Saban going to that running game and trying to limit some possessions there. How about Alabama 34-28? Second down. None of the numbers really suggest Minnesota should beat Penn State. The Nittany Lions have played like a near elite team. Not quite what we've seen out of Ohio State or Clemson or the two SEC schools, but not all that far off. Meanwhile, Minnesota is definitely good, but definitely not elite. Of course, sometimes good teams beat elite teams, especially at home. I'll take Penn State, but I think I actually have more confidence in Alabama beating LSU than Penn State beating Minnesota. In the other Big Ten game matching ranked teams, I like Wisconsin to get back on track against a pretty good Iowa team. I'd be surprised if either scores more than 2 touchdowns. I feel like we could use another big upset this weekend, too. Both of these favorites are at home, so it's probably a stretch. But Iowa State faces Oklahoma, and Missouri goes to Georgia. I see at least a little potential to give the playoff race an unexpected shake in these 2 games, though Missouri really hasn't played well away from home. Third down. Off the radar this week, well, Appalachian State probably buried its hopes of making the New Year's Six out of the Sun Belt when it lost at home to Georgia Southern last week. But the Mountaineers are at South Carolina this weekend, and I still have my eye on that game. I think App State will have an uphill climb in the playoff rankings, but envision a scenario where the AAC teams beat each other up, and that league comes away with a 2 or even a 3-loss champion. And if something similar were to play out in the Mountain West, which again is not a stretch, what would a 12-1 App State team with 2 victories against Power 5 teams look like to the committee? That's the show for today. I'd like to thank my producer, Warren Levinson, for making me sound good. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcast and just about anywhere you like to download your podcast. Please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. I'm Ralph Russo, the college football writer with the Associated Press. Thanks for listening, and come back for more next week of the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast.
This podcast is presented by Regions Bank. You're chasing your goals, and it's up to you how you want to get there. Let Regions Bank coach you with financial tips that fit your everyday grind. Visit regions.com/next-step to learn more. Regions, member FDIC.